Welcome to the Less Stressed Lawyer Show.
Hello and welcome back to the Less Stressed Lawyers Show with Miss Olivia Vizachero. Olivia is the former attorney turned life and business coach for lawyers. She helps ambitious attorneys stop overthinking, set those boundaries, and take bold action so they can build a practice and life they actually love. I'm Evan Mack, and today we're talking about why lawyers struggle to get to delegate and how to start letting go. Miss Olivia, my dear, welcome back.
Great to see you, Evan.
Good to see you too, Olivia. So why do so many lawyers hold on to work instead of, doing the delegation even when they know they're overloaded?
So this happens for a couple different reasons, and it's actually really helpful to figure out which bucket you fall into, because if you can categorize it, that's the first path to starting to solve it, because the solutions are a little bit different depending on what your specific issue is. So a big one is just lack of trust, right? So attorneys tell themselves, if it's got to be done, then it's got to be me who has to do it. No one's going to do it as well as me. So they'll hold on to work because they're afraid that whoever they're going to delegate it to isn't going to do as great of a job. So if that's the case, we have to either up your trust level or your tolerance for discomfort, shift the way that you think about how well it needs to be done. It doesn't need to be perfect. It doesn't need to be the best. If someone can do it 80% as well as you, that's a pretty good rule of thumb that that's something that should be delegated. But the other issue here is that attorneys will wait till the last minute to delegate. So even if there was someone who could do it as well as them or somewhat close to the job that they would be able to do on the task, they don't leave themselves enough time to delegate it, give it to the other person, have them do it, give it back, and then for the assigning attorney to review it and give feedback and tweak it. So instead, because they're down to the wire, they'll just do it because in actuality, it is faster in that moment for them to do it. So if that's the case, we either need to build more time into the schedule, plan, like reverse engineer it from when it's due, and think about all of the different steps that are going to come into that delegation process so you actually have enough time for it. Or you need to have someone in your pipeline that's already at the skill level so you can trust them to do the work and you don't need to do as much review and give feedback and all of that stuff.
So what tends to go through someone's mind right before they decide to just do something themselves instead of handing it off to someone?
A big one is they'll tell themselves, I can't delegate this. I have to do it myself. And those thoughts are going to keep you stuck in that same exact pattern. You might be thinking that the client won't be happy if you're not the one to do it. You also might be beating yourself up. I should have done this already. I should have assigned this earlier. And all of that should thinking is going to create a sense of guilt or disappointment with yourself. So again, you'll hold on to that work. So we want to start to shift the way that we think about it. How would you need to feel in order to be able to delegate something? Do you need to feel trusting? Do you need to feel calm instead of rushed? What do you need to think in order to feel those emotions? Do you need to feel a sense of groundedness that a client's going to be fine with someone else doing it? Do you need to feel confident that the person that you're delegating it to will in fact do a good enough job? So you want to be thinking about the thought and feeling combinations that you're experiencing in order to be able to pass that work off to someone else.
So where does the delegation most often break down in law practice? What's usually happening in those moments?
So if you actually are delegating, and I'll just start by saying that the delegation process typically breaks down by it not even existing to begin with. So if that's the case, we've got to figure out a process that you can follow and implement in order to be able to delegate. But let's assume that you've done a good job, you've actually passed it off to someone, you've gotten that work off your plate. Breaks down in a couple different places. Number one, lack of specificity with instructions. So many people think that they're being clear enough, that their instructions were very straightforward and simple and easy to implement. But if you get work product back that you're unhappy with, rather than blaming the person that you assigned it to, I really want to challenge people to look inward, take what I call radical ownership over the problem, and question, how could I have done this differently? How could I have done a better job explaining exactly what it was that I wanted back? Because if there's a gap between what you expected and what you received, chances are you weren't being clear enough. Now, one thing that people can do here is to actually think through what are all of the steps that you would have taken in order to complete this? Because so often we're giving instructions and we're thinking things are obvious or readily apparent, but there's things that go through our minds that we don't communicate when we're assigning work to another person. I see this all the time, just to give a quick example, with proofreading. People will get work product back. Let's say you assigned a contract for a first draft or a brief for a first draft to someone that works for you. And you get it back and you're like, what is this? This is a disaster. If you go through and you're like, there are so many errors here, chances are when you proofread a document, you have a little checklist in your head that you haven't written down anywhere, but it's what you go through. You might look at, are all of the indents the same in the paragraphs? Are the footnote fonts all the same? Is this justified versus left aligned? Do I want the footnotes to be a certain font and then the actual text to be a certain font or a certain size? Do I want, my case citations a certain way or a table of contents done a certain way? All of those things that you know to check for, someone else might not know to check for. And even if you think it's obvious, if the person didn't give it back to you that way, chances are it's not. So you can save yourself a ton of frustration and time if before you assign the work, you think through. And actually a great way to do this rather than having to reinvent the wheel is the next time you're working on something, as you're doing it, just keep a little list off to the side. What are the steps that you walk yourself through? What are the things that you check? You check to make sure there isn't an extra space after a paragraph. If you like 2 spaces after the end of a sentence, make sure that you note that so people know what to look for. And then when you assign work, you can also send someone that resource and say, hey, this is the checklist of things that you need to proofread. And once they have that to go off of, if you get it back, you can send it back to them and say, hey, this doesn't follow the list that I gave you. Make sure you go through and double check it. And then you're not having to redo that work yourself. They have a document to go and reference.
So how does holding on to too much work start to impact a lawyer's time and, ability just to focus on other things?
So it's so interesting. People tell themselves, if it's going to be done right, I have to be the one to do it, right? And they think that they're the person that will do the best job on that task. But when you're so overloaded, you might think that theoretically that is true, where if time were infinite and you weren't overwhelmed and you didn't have too much on your plate, that you would do the quote unquote best job. But because you're spread so thin, you actually don't often do as good of a job as someone who has less on their plate. So it's actually a thought error to think that you're the best person to do it. Second here, and to your point that you just mentioned, you also bog yourself down with maybe tasks or work that don't require the most experience or the higher level thinking. You're doing mundane, tedious stuff that someone else could do as well as you, maybe better than you, or at that 80% mark, like I mentioned earlier, and you don't have time to focus on the things that would really move the dial for you. Maybe that's high-level strategic thinking, maybe that's business development, so you keep having a pipeline of work coming in because you're focused on doing work that someone else could easily do for you. So that's another huge pain point that I see when people refuse to delegate.
So what are some of the common assumptions lawyers make about delegating that keeps them stuck doing everything themselves?
A big one is that delegation should save you time. And that actually is true in the long run, but most people focus on that in the short term. And that's where things go haywire. It's probably going to require more of your time in the beginning to delegate because you're going to go through that process of figuring out what exactly you're assigning, being very clear about the instructions you give. That requires a little thought and time in order to do that effectively. Then you got to give it to the person. I highly recommend some touch points and some check-ins. A huge mistake that I watch attorneys make is they'll give someone a huge assignment and a lot of runway. So let's say you want a draft of a brief, you give someone a month to work on it. And if you're assigning it to someone who maybe is not the best at managing their time, then they're going to wait till the last minute, shortchange themselves, rush, and possibly give it to you later than you expected it back. That can be a huge frustration for assigning attorneys. So we want some touch points. And then you need to have that final review where you're able to go through it, give feedback, flip it back to them so that person learns. Most people don't give themselves enough time to do that. And then they're the ones that make the revisions, which keeps the same problems repeating in the delegation process. So we want to make sure that we're giving enough time to this process, and that only happens when you're realistic that in the short term, it's going to require a bit more of your time, but this is a long-term investment. And then another thing that I see here is just an unwillingness to let the process be clunky. So people will delegate to a person and you'll get back work product that maybe you don't love, and you'll just decide, oh, this person's not the person that I should be delegating to. I don't want them to do the work for me again. They're just not cut out for it. They don't have what it takes to make my life easier. And again, this is expecting immediate relief, really fast success throughout this process. If you look at it and shift your assumption or your expectation to say, this is going to be a little messy. They're going to get some things wrong, but the process here isn't just for me to be able to offload work, but it's to start to teach my analysis to another person. So if you can look at wherever they miss the mark as a learning opportunity, and then you can engage in a collaborative process with them by asking them, hey, why is it that you did it this way? Have them explain it to you. The person that you're assigning work to might come back with, I don't know. That's typically a defense mechanism. We just say, I don't know, because it's easier in the moment than sorting through what we were thinking or having to explain a thought process that is obviously not what the person was hoping for. But if you can get them to answer and you can create a safe enough space for them to answer, then you can start to catch, where did their reasoning go wrong? And then you can teach the way that you think about it so that they know how to think about it the same way the next time. So the goal here is really over time for people to be able to arrive at the same answer as you, because you've taught them the framework or like the decision tree to think through it on their own.
So how does that perfectionism, show up in the way lawyers delegate or maybe avoid delegating altogether?
In two different ways, mainly. And perfectionism, like you said, is absolutely an issue here. So on the front end with that hoarding work, people will be perfectionistic about the quality of the output. So they won't delegate it because they're afraid that if they delegate it, it's going to miss the mark. It's not going to be as good as the job they would have done on that task. So they'll keep it because we're aiming for perfect, or at the very least best, which is, in my opinion, synonymous with perfect. It just sounds a little bit more reasonable. So they won't delegate at all. The second place perfectionism comes in here is a term that I refer to as other-oriented perfectionism. So if you are perfectionistic about your work product, or you're a perfectionist as far as your standards for yourself, chances are almost 100% of the time you're also perfectionistic with other people, and that's called other-oriented perfectionism. So you will expect them to be flawless or perfect as well. So when they give you something back that doesn't meet your expectation, you're very dismissive, you go quickly to being frustrated, and you think that something's gone wrong. If you're able to lower your expectations a bit and have them be more realistic or more in line with reality, that the person's going to do probably a pretty good job, especially if you give very clear, thoughtful instructions, but they're also going to make some mistakes. They're going to miss some things. Part of your job as the delegator is to go through a quality assurance process and, spot check their work. So if you're having this expectation that the work that they give you back is client ready, and that's something that I hear a lot in the legal industry, you need to give me client ready work. I should just be able to flip it to someone else. I understand that that's a standard that tends to make the person doing the work, the person who's being delegated to, it helps them amp up their standard for what they're turning in. But we don't want to use that as it should be 100% flawless, because chances are it won't be. And if that's your expectation, anytime there's a gap between your expectation and your lived experience, the reality of what you get back, you're going to experience that negative emotion, like frustration, like annoyance, things like that. So we want to lower the expectation a bit and allow for some room for a little bit of error. That helps things actually go more smoothly, which I know sounds counterintuitive, but it actually makes a big difference.
Yeah. So, what usually happens to a team or maybe a firm when the attorney at the top isn't delegating effectively, like you were talking about?
Couple different things. So if you're not delegating at all, chances are you're a bottleneck and your clients are going to experience that. You're also going to experience it because you're going to be super overwhelmed and feel guilty that you're not getting work product out to clients faster. Most people know that they're a bottleneck when they are, in fact, a bottleneck. So your clients are going to receive less timely, less responsive turnaround from you when it comes to the work that you're doing. That can also impact client communication. If you're so busy doing the work, chances are you don't have a lot of bandwidth to be communicating with your clients. And if you're at the top of the hierarchy there, that might be your responsibility. So you want to be thinking about that. The other thing that happens, so let's say you are delegating work, but you're not doing it very clearly. You're not giving those very transparent, very detailed instructions. You're probably experiencing a lot of intra-firm tension because you're getting frustrated. And most people, when they're frustrated, don't respond very favorably. So you'll probably take it out on the people that work for you. And now there's tension in the office. So the people who are working for you are probably a little fearful, especially if you're snippy or dismissive, or it comes across in your tone that you're a little annoyed with them. Then their anxiety is going to start to go up because people are perceptive. You're going to be less likely to delegate moving forward, and the tension just keeps increasing and increasing. So, if you want to create a really enjoyable and productive and efficient work environment, which most of my clients do, you really want to be thinking about. Actually, I have a client who says clarity is kindness, and this totally relates to delegation. The more clarity you give someone about what you're expecting, the
Mm.
better the odds are that they're going to be able to deliver work product that matches that. And even though it might feel a little bit more cumbersome, it's not just leading to better work product, it's leading to a better work environment, which is really key here.
So, what does effective delegation look like in practice, from assigning that work to following up on it?
So you want to spend a little bit of time. It doesn't have to be a lot of time. And I think that's another misconception that leads people to not delegate. When they hear me say that, you need to spend some time thinking about the assignment before you hand it off to someone. They're like, I don't have time for that. I need to sit down and think about it for like an hour or 30 minutes. That's too time consuming. You don't have to spend that much time. I often give my clients an exercise of like, just see how much you can write down in 3 minutes. Just think about it for 3 minutes. You can set a timer on your phone and see what you come up with. You will be so amazed how much progress you can make in that short of a time period. So start there. Think about the assignment. What is it that you want to delegate? When does it need to be done? Work backwards, give yourself enough time. You can actually calendar it. Hey, I'm going to review it here. I just spoke with a client recently who said that a colleague of hers dedicates time every single morning to reviewing delegated work. And that way, people aren't peppering her with questions all day long. They know to expect a response from her in the morning with her feedback or just responses to any questions that they had. And then she's able to kick it back to them. So they're busy working on it all day long. And then she's free to do the other things that she needs to do as she goes through her day. So that can be a really great setup as far as delegating work goes. But again, work backwards from when it's due, have those check-in points. And most people will probably feel uncomfortable, especially if they tend to be on the more reserved side, coming to you with questions. So set that up as well. Create an expectation that you're going to meet at this frequency in order to discuss the assignment. They should be able to come to you and explain the progress that they've made on it between your last meeting and build in the expectation that they have questions. So if you expect them and require them to ask you something, they'll know and come prepared with a question or a few questions that helps move them forward. So that's a big one too.
So, when someone is about to take something on themselves instead of delegating it, what can they do differently in that moment?
So one default question that I find really helpful, and I believe this comes from the book 10x is better than 2x, but it's to shift the way that you think about who's going to do the work by changing the question you ask yourself. And as someone who used to have the mindset of if it's got to be me if it's going to be done right, I would always default to how am I going to get this done? And if that's the question that you ask yourself, especially when you're feeling overwhelmed or a little spread thin, we want to shift that to not how, but who. We want to shift that to not how, but who. And the reason for that is it changes the assumption. When you're thinking about how am I going to get this done, the assumption is that you will be the one to do it. When we change the question to who is going to do this, the assumption there is it's not you. So if we can shift that assumption every time you're going into reviewing the work on your plate and you're thinking who, not how, you're able to start to identify who are my helpers, who's actually available on my team that I could hand this off to. And when your brain starts to focus on that question first, and you kind of put yourself on the back burner, you bench yourself, so to speak, then you're able to more readily find those options that aren't always just you working late, you working weekends in order to get things done. The other thing that I really want to note here is not every single person will be the right person for the job. So also be thoughtful about people's strengths and capabilities. Like I used to be really good in a crisis and really good at the last minute. I could handle that pressure. If you wanted something done like way in advance, way ahead of time, when I struggled with time management, I was probably not the best person for that. There were also certain tasks that I was really great at where there were other things that other people were really good at. So you want to be thinking about that stuff. If someone gets anxiety and really only feels confident when they've prepared a lot, maybe don't throw that person into something at the last minute. There was a time where I got a phone call. I was on the way to court. We were in the middle of a trial and my boss called me and he was like, you need to go to this different courthouse while I'm driving to the first courthouse. And he's like, you have to handle a preliminary examination, which is sort of like a miniature trial. Wow. And I only had a couple hours notice. And instead of pushing back, I just knew there's probably not much room to push back here. Like I'm just going to, figure it out, push my way through it, and I'll get to the other side of it, even if I'm uncomfortable. But I know other people that would not be able to handle that last minute stress. And other people thrive in different ways. Maybe they're really mathematical and have great attention to detail. That was also one of my strengths. But people have different qualities. Maybe that's one of theirs. Give them the work that requires a ton of detail where they can get into the weeds and go through everything with a fine-tooth comb. Other people, like that sends them into a tailspin. So you want to be thinking about who is the best person for this job and not requiring everyone that works for you to be a cookie cutter copy of one another.
Good stuff, Miss Olivia. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, Evan. Thanks.
All right. That's it for today's episode of the Less Stressed Lawyer Show. If you're ready to stop overthinking and start making bold moves in your life and your practice, visit oliviavizachero.com. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the show, and leave a review if you found this episode helpful, and we'll see you all next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.